Everybody's seen a cowboy movie, a hero in a wide-brimmed hat, a revolver on his hip, riding free through the desert. A lie. The real Old West was a hell of exploitation, filth, and misery, where cowboys were disposable hired hands, not legends. Today, I'm bringing you 21 shocking facts about cowboys that sound made up, but they're all true, based on historical records. Number 1. In the Old West, making it to 40 was already considered an achievement. Most men didn't die in shootouts like Hollywood shows. They died from simple things: a cut that got infected, a fever that wouldn't go down, a rotten tooth that turned into sepsis. Doctors were rare, and many were quacks who did more harm than good. Whiskey was the most common anesthetic in makeshift surgeries. Entire towns went months without a single doctor. If you broke a leg out in the territory, your chances depended on luck and whoever happened to be nearby. Women died in childbirth at an alarming rate. Children didn't make it to 5. And when someone died, there was no insurance and no guaranteed funeral. A lot of times the body was buried where it fell, with a wooden cross the wind would carry off within a few months. Life was short, and everyone knew it. Number 2. Forget that image of a tough 40-year-old cowboy who looks like he's seen it all. The reality was very different. Most cowboys were between 16 and 24 years old. They were just boys, many of them not even able to grow a beard yet. After the Civil War, the South was destroyed. Farms burned down, families were ruined, and there was no work and no future. Thousands of young men headed west because they simply had nothing left. Driving cattle across Texas paid about $1 a day, which was next to nothing. But for a kid with no money in his pocket, it was better than starving. The work was brutal. Long days under the sun or rain, endless dust, nights spent sleeping on the ground. Many didn't last a full season. Some died from simple diseases, others in stampedes. Hollywood turned those boys into heroes. In real life, they were just kids trying to survive. Number 3. The pay was miserable. $25 to $40 a month. That was all a cowboy made back in the 1870s and 1880s. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about something around $700 to $800 today. Less than what any part-time job pays now. And keep in mind, the guy wasn't working part-time. These were 16-hour days, 7 days a week, with no days off, no overtime, nothing. He was up before sunrise and didn't stop until he couldn't see anymore. He slept on the hard ground, often without even taking off his boots because he might have to jump up in the middle of the night if the cattle got spooked. And he still had to cover part of his own food and gear with that money. A lot of cowboys went whole months without seeing a town. When they finally got to one, they spent everything in a single night. It wasn't partying. It was desperation from people living on the edge. Number 4. Nearly 1 out of every 3 cowboys was black or Mexican. When Hollywood created the image of the American cowboy, it left out a huge part of the real history. After the Civil War, thousands of former slaves had no land, no money, and not many options. The West offered hard work, but it offered work. Many of these men became real cowboys, driving cattle along long trails like the Chisholm Trail. Historians estimate that between 25 and 35% of cowboys were black or Mexican. That means nearly 1 out of every 3 men on those trails was not white. Names like Bass Reeves and Nat Love were real, and they did things that would make any John Wayne movie look small by comparison. But for decades, the studios simply erased these people from the screen. The question that remains is simple. Why? Number 5. That had everyone pictures on a cowboy. Forget it. That nice, well-shaped Stetson we see in the movies didn't exist out on the prairies in the 1870s. What cowboys really wore was whatever protected them from the sun and the rain. Cheap felt hats with wide, crooked brims and no real shape to them. A lot of them even wore old top hats or leftover Civil War caps. John B. Stetson created his famous Boss of the Plains in Hagive, but it cost the equivalent of 2 months' wages for a ranch hand. Almost nobody could afford one. The style only became popular decades later, when shows like Buffalo Bills started selling the romanticized image of the West. Real cowboys had other priorities. Food, tobacco, and ammunition came before any kind of vanity. The iconic hat was born in marketing, not on the cattle trail. Number 6. The real job was driving cattle, and it was awful. The big cattle drives lasted anywhere from 2 to 4 months. An average cowboy drove around 3,000 head along trails like the Chisholm, which ran more than 1,200 kilometers from Texas to Kansas. The pay was around $25 to $40 a month, which came out to about $1 a day. In return, the guy dealt with dust storms that blinded you for hours, river crossings where men and horses often drowned, and sleepless nights guarding the herd to prevent stampedes. Dysentery was so common that a lot of cowboys could barely stay in the saddle. It's estimated that between 1986 and 86, more than 10 million head of cattle crossed those trails. But few people talk about the men who died along the way, not in shootouts, but from exhaustion, disease, and ordinary accidents that nobody cared enough to record. Number 7. Have you ever stopped to think about what really killed cowboys? Most people picture shootouts and duels in the middle of the street. But the truth is, the local saloon was more dangerous than any gunslinger. The saloons in the Old West sold whiskey that was whiskey in name only. The owners mixed pure alcohol with strychnine, turpentine, and even rat poison to give the drink that extra kick. They called it rot gut for a good reason. It tore up your stomach from the inside out. Cowboys would roll in after weeks on the trail, thirsty and with money in their pockets. They'd order a glass and drink it without asking questions. There were no inspections, no labels, no laws protecting anyone. A lot of them woke up the next day in terrible pain. Others simply never woke up. The irony is that these men survived stampedes and storms, only to go down because of a cheap glass of whiskey. Number 8. The Old West. Everybody knows from the movies lasted about 30 years, from the end of the Civil War to the mid-1890s. That sounds like a long time, but think of it this way. It's less time than the Law and Order franchise has been on the air. In that short span, millions of people headed into the unknown. Entire towns were born and died. Legends like Wyatt Earp and Billy the Kid lived and fell, and the bison was nearly wiped out. When the Census Bureau declared in 1890 that there was no longer a continuous frontier line, the Wild West basically came to an end. Barbed wire, railroads, and the law started swallowing everything up. Hollywood took those 3 decades and turned them into a mythology that feels like it lasted for centuries. But the truth is that brutal freewheeling world disappeared faster than most people imagine. Number 9. A lot of people think the sheriff was the highest authority in an Old West town. In practice, the ones really in charge were the railroads and the cattle companies. Dodge City, Abilene, and many others were created to serve the interests of those companies. The sheriff? In many cases, he was hired directly by them. His job wasn't to protect the average citizen. It was to make sure the cattle got to the train and nobody interfered with business. If a drunk cowboy caused trouble, he got arrested. But if a cattle baron did something worse, nobody laid a hand on him. The law existed to protect money, not people. Entire towns were born and died depending on where the railroad decided to lay the tracks. When the train stopped coming through, the town became a ghost town. Simple as that. The real power was never in the sheriff's badge. It was in the pocket of whoever paid his salary. Number 10. Cowboys spent months isolated on cattle trails, sleeping on the ground and going weeks without seeing a town. When they finally reached places like Dodge City or Abilene, their first stop was almost always the saloon, and right after that, the brothel. Brothels operated openly in pretty much every town in the West. Some places had entire streets dedicated to it. The problem was that syphilis and gonorrhea spread like wildfire. There were no antibiotics and no real prevention. Treatments at the time included mercury, which slowly poisoned the patient. A lot of men died not from bullets or fights, but from infections that took years to eat away at the body from the inside. Doctors knew what was happening, but they had no way to stop it. It was a slow death sentence nobody wanted to admit. Number 11. Native people weren't the villains. They were the original owners. Before barbed wire and the railroads, the Great Plains had belonged to native peoples for thousands of years. They weren't aimless nomads like Hollywood portrayed them. They had carefully mapped migration routes, following the bison that provided food, clothing, and shelter. When cattle started taking over the grazing land, those routes were cut off. Ranchers and cowboys pushed herds through sacred territory without thinking twice. The government encouraged the slaughter of bison specifically to weaken the tribes. It's estimated that more than 50 million bison were killed in just a few decades. Cowboys weren't riding and shooting up villages, but every herd that crossed those lands helped destroy a way of life that had existed long before the United States was even an idea. They were the front line of something they barely understood. Number 12. When the Civil War ended, thousands of former slaves headed west looking for a new life. Many became real cowboys, working the same cattle trails as anyone else. But freedom on paper didn't mean equality out on the range. These men were usually paid less for the same work and got stuck with the jobs nobody wanted, like breaking the most dangerous horses. Nat Love was one of them. Born into slavery in Tennessee, he became one of the best cowboys of his time, winning shooting and roping competitions in Deadwood. Even so, his name nearly vanished from history. It's estimated that 1 out of every 4 cowboys was black. But when Hollywood started telling these stories, it simply erased all of them. The real Old West was a lot more diverse than we were led to believe. Number 13. Most cowboys never traded gunfire with each other the way Hollywood shows. The real violence happened against native peoples. Ranchers and cattle owners needed land, a lot of land, and cowboys were part of that expansion machine. They drove herds through territories that had belonged to entire tribes for centuries. When native people resisted, the army and militias stepped in. Between 1860 and 1890, indigenous communities were wiped out or forced onto miserable reservations. The government encouraged the mass killing of buffalo specifically to destroy the native way of life. No buffalo, no resistance. Cowboys took part in those mass hunts. The result was millions of animals killed and entire tribes left starving. The cowboy we admire as a hero was, in practice, a piece of an invasion machine. That part of the story rarely shows up in movies. Number 14. Men spent entire months without seeing another human being. Alone in cabins in the middle of nowhere, tending cattle or mining, many started talking to objects, having sudden fits of rage for no reason, or simply stopped eating. Today we call that PTSD, depression, a nervous breakdown. Back then it didn't have a name. The man was called weak or crazy, and the only remedy available was a bottle of cheap whiskey There were no doctors nearby, and even if there had been, nobody understood what was happening in those men's minds. Many simply disappeared. Neighbors would find abandoned cabins weeks later with food still on the table. The isolation of the West didn't kill only with bullets or disease. It killed from the inside, slowly, without anyone noticing until it was too late. Fact 15. Hollywood sold a pretty lie about the Old West. Dodge City, which everyone imagines as a battlefield, averaged about 1 homicide a year in the 1870s. The truth is, those towns had stricter gun laws than most people realize. When a cowboy arrived in Dodge City or Tombstone, he had to hand over his revolver at the edge of town. Yes, you heard that right. Signs warned that carrying guns within city limits was prohibited. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral happened precisely because the Clantons refused to disarm. Wyatt Earp was there to enforce the gun control law. Most cowboys spent the night drinking, playing cards, and leaving the next morning. The Wild West was more a creation of writers and showmen like Buffalo Bill than of reality. Fact 16. Between 1871 and 1873, a family in southeastern Kansas ran a small roadside inn. The Benders seemed like ordinary people. They welcomed tired travelers, offered food, and gave them a place to rest. But there was one sinister detail. They would seat the guest in a chair placed against a canvas curtain. On the other side, someone waited with a hammer. The blow came from behind, without warning. Then they dragged the body through a trap door in the floor and buried it out back. Nobody got suspicious because the distances between towns were huge. A traveler could disappear, and it might take months before anyone noticed. There were at least 11 confirmed victims, including a child. When neighbors started getting suspicious and organized a search, the entire family vanished overnight. They were never found. To this day, nobody knows what happened to the Benders. Number 17. The Cowboys' biggest enemy wasn't the outlaw, it was barbed wire. When Joseph Glidden patented barbed wire in 1804, nobody imagined the damage it would cause. Before that, cattle roamed free across millions of unfenced acres. Cowboys drove herds for hundreds of miles along open trails, like the Chisholm Trail. That was how they made a living. But then ranchers started fencing everything off. Every roll of wire closed off another piece of land that used to belong to everyone. The trails were cut off, the cattle could no longer pass, and the cowboys were left without work. In less than 10 years, that barbed wire did what neither outlaws nor sheriffs could do. It ended the way of life of the man who lived on horseback. There were even armed conflicts over cut fences. One simple farm invention destroyed an entire era. Fact 18. Most cowboys made about $1 a day. When cattle driving work ended in the winter, these men were left with nothing. No family nearby, no roof over their heads, and no guarantee of their next meal. Many crossed the line into crime simply because hunger doesn't wait. It wasn't a career choice, it was pure survival. Some of the most well-known outlaws of the Old West started out exactly like that, as ordinary workers who one day had nowhere else to turn. Towns didn't offer jobs in the winter, and ranches let temporary hands go without a second thought. So the man who had spent the whole summer on horseback taking care of cattle could be robbing a stagecoach the next winter. Hollywood turned these men into anti-heroes, but the truth is, a lot less romantic. It was pure desperation. Fact 19. In 1856, the United States Army had an idea that sounds like a joke, but it's real. They imported camels from the Middle East to carry supplies across the deserts of the Southwest. The project worked better than they expected. The animals handled the heat, carried more weight than mules, and needed very little water. But when the Civil War broke out, the program was abandoned. soldiers turned the camels loose in the Texas desert and simply left. And here comes the crazy part. Those camels survived, reproduced, and went wild. Cowboys and travelers reported scary encounters with these huge animals suddenly appearing on the trails. Horses would panic because they had never seen anything like them. The last sightings were recorded in the 1940s, nearly a century of camels roaming loose through the Old West. Fact 20. In 1911, Elmer McCurdy tried to rob a train in Oklahoma and ended up dead in a shootout with the law. Up to that point, it was a pretty typical Old West story. But what happened next was something nobody expected. No one claimed the body, so the undertaker embalmed McCurdy with arsenic and started charging 5 cents for people to see the corpse. It worked so well that carnival and traveling fair promoters began renting the body out as an attraction. For decades, Elmer traveled across the United States as a piece of entertainment. As time went on, everyone forgot that it was a real person. In 1986, a TV crew was filming at an amusement park in Long Beach when a technician moved what looked like a wax dummy. The arm broke and human bone showed up. It was McCurdy, lost in the sideshow circuit for 66 years. Number 21. Bass Reeves arrested more than 3,000 criminals in Indian Territory, what is now Oklahoma. He was never taken down by a gunshot, even though he was targeted hundreds of times. He never took money from outlaws. He worked in a region where the law barely existed, tracking fugitives that white men refused to go after. He was born into slavery in 1838 and escaped during the Civil War. He later became the first black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi. When he died in 1910, the local newspapers ran short notices. And then came the silence. For decades, nobody really told his story the way it should have been told. But the details of his life line up with something you might know very well. A masked lawman who rode with a native companion. The Lone Ranger debuted on radio in 1933. 23 years after Reeves died, Hollywood took the real hero and painted over him. Number 22. The cowboy you know from the movies was invented by men in suits sitting in New York offices. In the 1920s and 1930s, railroad companies and cattlemen's associations realized they needed people willing to move west and spend money there. The solution was to help finance Hollywood so it could create a glorified image of the frontier. Those lone heroes riding handsome horses, facing down outlaws at sunset. All of that was designed to sell train tickets and cheap land. The studios were more than happy to go along with it because westerns made money at the box office. The result was that whole generations grew up believing in a version of the West that never really existed. The real cowboy lived dirty, was underpaid, and often died young from disease, not bullets. But that story didn't sell tickets. The myth made billions and still shapes how Americans see their own history today.